What is up, everybody? Today we're going to be tackling the trimming of a brisket. Now, I know that you have probably tore through a pork butt and maybe some racks of ribs or a pork loin, but you're ready for a challenge. And let me tell you, if you've never done a brisket, it is definitely a challenge, but it can be tackled. And today we're going to go over how I like to trim my briskets for myself and for people that I'm going to be feeding. In my opinion, there are three different ways to trim a brisket. Number one would be the backyard style. You're going to leave a little bit more fat on, and you're also going to have a little bit more meat to feed all your patrons. Next is semi-pro, which is what I do 90% of the time. And the last one would be competition. It's always a good idea to stay hydrated. So today, I will be sipping on Tropicana Citrus IPA from Heavy Seas Beer Company. Okay, so to get started, you're going to need a few things. First, I like to wear nitrile gloves. I don't like my hands getting all nasty, so these keep them protected. There are a few different knife choices that you can go through, but I have a fillet knife. I believe it is an 8-inch fillet knife, which it's not ideal. A boning knife would be better, but this one is too large. This is also an 8-inch. I suggest a 6-inch, and I'm going to be ordering one here soon. You're also going to need an aluminum pan, something that you can throw in the smoker, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Lastly, obviously, you're going to need the hunk of meat. Now, I suggest putting it in a freezer for about an hour, hour and a half before you're getting ready to slice. And the reason you want to do that is because you want that fat to stay nice and hard. You don't want it to start to warm up as you're cutting it because it will become more jelly-like, and it's actually pretty dangerous because your knife is not going to want to cut it near as well. So if you look here, this is what's called a Packer brisket. This came from my local Walmart. Is there anything wrong with getting meat from Walmart? No. Is it the greatest? Still no. However, it is choice. Okay, so if you flip this over and right there, it's going to tell you, right there, it's going to tell you what grade of meat it is. So you have select, then you have choice, prime, and then you get into the really, really nice stuff. So if you can find prime and it's on sale, buy every single one you can. Put them in your freezer. They'll be good for a while. So before I get into cutting into this, again, I just pulled this out of the freezer. It's very cold. You can see it's a pretty warm day here in Ohio, nice and humid. I'm getting some condensation already. So the brisket is divided into two different pieces of meat. So if we look at it this way, see how this side is much thicker than this side. So we have our flat or the lean, and you have your point, which is this side. This is going to be much fattier because there's a fat line running in between the lean and the point. You have the bottom, and you have the fat side. Okay? I cook almost everything fat side up. I just do. I always have. If you have a pellet grill, there's a lot of conversation about maybe doing it fat side down. That can be for a different video. But for right now, we're going to start with it fat side down. And what I like to do is you want to trim right along here, which is called the decal. And I'll show you that here in a second. So we're going to cut this open. You're going to open her up. I don't like having all of this juice, but one thing I have learned is you want to kind of rub it down. You want to be able to feel where there might be certain harder spots or softer spots or where the fat is and all that stuff. So as I'm doing this, I'm just looking and feeling for little imperfections and whatnot. Now, every brisket is different. I will tell you that. So if you go even to Walmart, you find a choice brisket. I believe this one was like 11 pounds. I typically like them a little bit bigger, but this is what they had. Every single one is going to be a little different. So when you go home and you start to do this on your own, yours might look a little bit different than mine. But I can assure you, the more that you practice, the better you're going to get. So for this, for example, most of the ones that I've done before don't have this extended fat from here over. Usually, this is already trimmed off. So we're just going to take our knife, trim that off. And a lot of people will throw this away. I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to throw it in the pan. And we'll get to that in a little bit. Now, here is the decal. This right here. This is one giant piece of fat. It might look like it has a little bit of meat in there, and it has a tiny bit, but we're going to cut that out, and I'm going to show you why. So take your knife, and sometimes you can just peel it with your hand, but you want to kind of dig in there, and what we're going to do here is we're going to make a little score right along this decal, which I named a cat decal one time because, well, he was white, like this fat cap here, and I liked the name. But as you can see, I'm kind of pulling as I go. And what you're going to do is you're just going to run your knife. You don't want to take too much off at one time, and the knife, or actually the meat rather, will kind of just come off as it should. So here we go. There's the decal. Whoa, slippery little booger. Now, if I cut this in half, that's what you're looking at. That's the decal. You do not want to eat that. And another big tip here is if you ever go to a barbecue joint and they take it out of their warmer, they'll slap it on here, and what they're going to typically do is they'll rotate it, and they will come in with the knife, make a slice, and kick it out. That's what they're doing. They're getting rid of that decal. All right, so let's get it back over here. And again, we're kind of massaging it. We want to see and feel where any of the little imperfections are. Now, for backyard, a lot of people will leave all this. This is where you have your silver skin and just some extra fat. Or if you're doing a lot of them, it can kind of be a pain. And by a lot of them, I mean like 10 or more. So what I like to do is I'll kind of pinch some of this up and then get my knife underneath there. And again, the colder this is, the better. And silver skin I don't really want to save because that's not what I'm looking for in my pan. And what you're going to kind of do is get your knife flat and just kind of run it over all this fat, and you're just taking it off. But be careful, the knife is sharp, and a dull knife is a dangerous knife. So we're going to keep doing that. Now, I will tell you, if this was warm, I would look like I'm in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just trying to gouge through everything, and you do not want that. So here we have some of this nasty, rubbery looking, disgusting fat. We just want to get rid of that. And again, this is all kind of personal preference on this bottom part here. I like to get as much of it as I can off of there, just because it's yucky fat. And like here, you have some silver skin, and you also don't want to like gouge into the meat. That would be a big no-no. So as we trim some of this off, now this is the bottom part of the decal. So I would trim all of this off as well. Just kind of dig in there. And again, give it just a little bit of pressure. Just kind of score it a little bit and pull as you slice. We will keep that. And we're going to throw all this away. Now, you might be thinking, oh my, That's a big divot. So if I flip this around, that's a big divot in there. It is, however, it is necessary. And when we flip it over, you'll see why. Okay, so again, we're continuing to feel for any little imperfections. That's all right. Don't be scared to trim some of the meat off too. I mean, just wait till we flip it over. You're going to see what I mean by not being scared to trim some of that meat off. Yes, I know that brisket is not cheap. Oh, I want to note, so this was just shy of 11 pounds on August 2nd of 2002, and it was $43 from Walmart. Okay, looking pretty good. All right, now, if you look here, so this stuff is all like brown, which I believe is from oxygen kind of hitting it during the packaging and all that good stuff. You don't really want that. You can keep it for a backyard, and you want to have as much of it as you can keep it. However, I don't like the look of it. So what I will do is I'm going to come in right here, and instead of going perpendicular to my board, I'm going to kind of angle it in. And that's going to give us a profile for when we flip it over. And I'll show you that here in a second. But we're just kind of coming in blindly. And again, if you need to come over like almost the width of a really thick piece of bacon, we're just going to kind of trim all that off. Now, there's not a whole lot of fat in there. There we go. Looking pretty good. And then I'm going to kind of just round this tip of this lean part off. There we go. Okay, that's looking pretty good for this side. Maybe a little bit more here. Okay, so that's the profiled edge. It's looking pretty good. Now, this little wing here, we'll take care of that when we get on the other side. Again, just kind of looking at any little thing. And here's the trick. So you don't want to take off too much at one time. You can always go back and take some more off. And we flip. This is where I want to thank this week's sponsor. This week's sponsor is brought to you by my mother. Well, because without her, I wouldn't be here teaching you how to chop up this fatty, fatty piece of goodness that you're going to feed yourself, your friends, your family, a homeless guy down the street. So everybody give my mom a giant thank you. This is more so your presentation side. As a backyard cooker, presentation isn't all that important. As a semi-pro like myself, my goal is to be able to make one look like a competition style. If we look here, when you throw it on your smoker, no matter what kind of smoker it is, you want it to lay almost as flat as possible. Think of it like you're working for NASA and you want it to be the most aerodynamic piece of meat you've ever seen. Okay, so after looking at it, and again, I'm not a pro, so what I have to do is I will sit there and look at the brisket for a while to kind of get an idea of what I want. And actually, this is fairly lean. A lot of times you'll have big chunks of fat over here and sometimes a mound of fat here. But this is also the decal side, which we cut out, which is helping it lay much flatter. Okay, so most people will go with a rule of thumb of about 1/4 of an inch. And honestly, that's where we're at here. It's kind of hard to tell on camera, but that's pretty close to 1/4 of an inch. So I'm not going to take much off of that. However, I do have this little pocket of fat here. I don't really want that because that will burn and that has pretty good meat underneath it. So what we're going to do is, and honestly, this is pretty close to where the point meat and the lean meat come together. So what we're going to kind of do is just trim right here, and then we're going to pick it up and kind of swoop down. Now, again, this is actually not a very fatty brisket, so this isn't the best example. But what you're going to do is just start to trim it off. Now, right here, when you first start, you will get bald spots like I just did here. You don't want those. However, it doesn't ruin the cook. Okay, so what we're going to do is, and I'm going to turn it this way because it's a little bit easier for me, but we're just going to kind of ride that fat and see how it's starting to warm up, and it wants to kind of, it doesn't go through as much as it should, like when I started. And I'm just going to ride that off of there. And I'm going to continue to push because I want, like right now, we have this puddle. I don't want that puddle. So we're going to continue to take this off. We're going to take this off of here. And again, I'm putting all this in this pan, and I'll tell you why once we get everything trimmed up. Okay, now, here's the part where you're going to probably get mad. If you look, this, we push it all down. This right here is not good. See if I can get that on camera. Right here, it's raised way too much. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to kind of push my knife through, and I'm going to trim all this off. Now, are you going to get meat here? Absolutely. But all of that is going to probably end up burning in the long run. Now, again, this is not a fatty brisket. Most of the time, there is a lot more fat on here, which, looking back, I wish there was. So again, as we continue to push it down, now, there's still a lot of fat here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push that down. I'm going to take my knife, and I'm going to kind of profile it right around the edge. Still have a lot of fat here right at the point. I'm going to take that down. And again, just pushing it through. Okay, so the point is looking pretty good. Maybe a little bit there. Get that off of there. Okay, now we get to the other side. So this is opposite of the decal side. And if you look, this is a bunch of nasty fat, and it does have a decent amount of meat in there, but it's just hanging off, flapping in the wind. You don't want that. Much like you don't want your arms to be doing that, you don't want your brisket to be doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of shape it with the profile of this lean part. So we're just going to take this here and kind of swoop it around. Now, again, yes, this has a lot of meat on it. Now, if we look here, we have a nice, fairly nice profiled brisket. I'm going to trim a little bit more off of here, just because it's not the greatest fat. A little bit more here, and that is looking pretty good. So on the back side here, we have that angled cut that we made. Usually you'll have a much thicker fat cap here, and we do the angle so you know exactly where you're at. So here, I'm just going to run my knife across there because I'm trying to shape it. And again, if you have a grinder, that's perfect for a grinder, but I'm throwing it away. Okay, now you can absolutely stop here. However, if we look, this piece of meat it doesn't have any fat on it. So we're going to trim that off. That's about right there. And on the back side, for a perfect brisket, you would have a much thicker fat cap right there. But we don't. Again, it's kind of just the risk you take when you're picking them out. I like to pick fattier briskets because of what we have going on right here. but this is all they had in the case. So, trim off a little bit here. And if this is your first brisket, I want you to put in the comments, my first brisket. So that way I know if you have any extra questions, I'll come to you first. Because it can be a little overwhelming, but with practice, you're going to be able to get there. Now, if you can look here, okay? So right here, we've got a brisket is made of two different styles of meat. All right, you've got, which is really coming from the front portion of a cow. Okay, so you've got the point here, which rides all along this top of this fat cap. And then that lean, or the flat, goes underneath all the way. Now, if you're doing burnt ends, that's a whole different ball game, but that comes from the point. So they would take the point and then dice it up, put a little sauce on there, and then throw it back on the smoker. But if I'm going through all of this, which burnt ends are great, don't get me wrong, but if I'm going through all of this, and with the price of beef right now, I don't want to do burnt ends because I like the point how it is. Okay. So let me do a little bit more trimming on this side, just because it's got a little extra ball of fat here. We're just going to take that straight over. And again, we're starting to get a little bit warm. And this little flap is hanging off. So we're just going to take that. Kind of shape our point. Now, this is where you go from backyard to more of that semi-pro. You want to kind of shape it in kind of an oval would be the way I would describe it. But again, oh, we got this little guy right here. I'm just going to take that off. And that is looking pretty good. Now, one last thing. So, this would be good for a backyarder, no problem. It's a little thin there, but there's nothing we could do because we didn't trim anything off of that. But to go to a semi-pro, you almost want to profile this like this, which is what I'm about ready to do. Do you lose meat? Yes, you do. But, again, a lot of this is going to be dry. There's just not enough meat to fat ratio, and because it's all the way on the end, you want to give it as much of a chance as possible. So either you cut it off now, or you cut it off later, and I'm going to do it now. So we're just going to kind of ride that knife along here, make that turn, and again, it's getting a little bit warm because it's like 85 degrees here in the shop. We're just going to take that, ride it across. I'm going to come over here. And there we go. So right there is how I like to do my briskets.